Hey guys, welcome back to our channel. This is episode 2 of the book review, The Ending of Time. Now, if you just stopped by for the first time, I would advise you to, if you're interested in this book and if you're interested in understanding it, I would advise you to go back to the review of the previous chapter and do that first, because this is metaphysics and it's quite abstract. It's it's philosophy at its best, and so you really need to go step by step in order to understand the content, I feel. So, but anyway, so this is chapter 2, and we will do it the same way as we did last time. I have my notes here, so I will be looking down quite a bit. And I will again also cite the actual dialogue in places, so there's going to be the people popping up left and right of my shoulder again to clarify who's actually talking at the time. Right, so let's get started. In chapter 2, Krishnamurti starts out with first with an attempted summary of the conversation so far, and he concludes that generally man lives in time and he's preoccupied with knowledge of outer things, generally speaking, and that, he says, seems to be man's fundamental problem, is that he never actually looked at this fact of being kind of trapped in time and being only preoccupied with outer things, and that this being trapped in ego and in time is his fundamental problem. Moreover, he sort of makes a blanket statement when he says that, or when he suggests that religions, politicians and educators alike have failed to investigate that which is beyond time. And that's quite a broad statement to make, but that's the kind of statement he likes to make. And luckily we have David Bohm giving a bit of a counterbalance, whenever he seems to be quite, when he sort of takes his broad brush and just makes this huge strike. Usually David Bohm kind of counteracts and specifies and all that. But so one suggestion why man has failed, or why religion, politicians and educators have failed, is that there generally seems to be the notion, that there is progress in conflict. There seems to be the notion that wherever there is conflict, the resolution of the conflict will bring progress. And so in as much as man seeks to progress, over time, he doesn't seem to be interested in letting go of conflict. So there seems to be this basic incentive for man to continue living in ego, in time, and therefore in conflict. And that other state of consciousness, which, is pretty much being talked about here in this book, and which transcends ego, or which transcends time, seems almost impossible to be described with words and with language. We've talked about this many times before. Nevertheless, a bunch of descriptions for that other state of mind, or that other type of consciousness, have been offered so far, and I think it's worthwhile to sort of summarize what they've been. So that state of consciousness is described, or has been described, to be that which is not the I or the me, that which is not in time, that which isn't the process of becoming, that which isn't knowledge, that which isn't hope, for hope implies projected thought and therefore time, that which isn't desire, that which arises, that which might be creation, that which is not belief, and that which is not attachment. Krishnamurti then concludes that when the particular mind or the individual mind comes to an end, there is only mind. So what follows is an attempt to clarify the relationship of mind and nature, and one could almost sort of treat that as like an excursus, in this overall conversation, because it won't be referred to anymore in this chapter, but nevertheless we should probably cover it because it's in itself, it's kind of important, but you can sort of treat that bit as an excursus. So to the relationship of mind and nature, we can summarize in a couple of hypotheses, and they were: there is a universal mind. That's a basic hypothesis that the two of them make. The second one is that nature is the creation of universal mind. The third one is that therefore nature is in universal mind. The fourth one, there is energy beyond universal mind. And lastly, this energy, which is beyond universal mind, is alive and intelligent. I mean, you could take one of these statements and talk about it for hours on end, but we won't do that here. I said in my first video, my main purpose to do these videos is to sort of, allow you to access the content. I think what's needed is, in any way, is for you to go back, to actually read the text yourself and or listen to the actual conversation, which had been recorded at the time. And as usual, I will link both of them in the description box. So I think you could regard that almost like as your homework, as either read the chapter, in advance of watching these videos here, and or listen to the conversation, for things to sort of sink in, because it takes time to internalize what's being talked about here, really. So far so good. Next, the question arises: why, if that energy is alive and intelligent, why it would allow for man or for individual mind to move in the wrong direction in the first place? And here I want to sort of interject real quick, because it reminds me of a question that's, that sort of any religious person that believes in any kind of God, or superior authority, asks themselves at some point. That is, in the face of evil or in the face of pain, it's like, why does God allow, or why would God allow evil or pain in the first place? And I think both questions reveal the fundamental difficulty for us to get out of ego consciousness and to sort of move into this more universal type of consciousness, because we equate individual mind or ourselves with having agency, and by that I mean we not only is that we tend to become, we tend to aim at something, we tend to pursue goals, and we tend to sort of give ourselves the authority to allow certain actions and to disallow other actions. So that's what I mean by agency, So when we do that, when we sort of discern whether we should allow for something to happen or for something not to happen, we mostly do that on a set of principles. And you know, we usually refer to those as, you know, morals, ethics, or any type of rules or law that you adhere to in you know, any type of rules or laws that are given to you by the religion that whatever religion you follow. And the only reason such ethics or morals work, or the only time, I should say, these morals or ethics work, is when enough people actually adhere to them, because there's no use in only one person adhering to them and all the other people not, you know. So both morals and ethics are very much based on the notion that there actually are independently existing individual minds with agency, with free will, the freedom to choose one course of action over another. And when individual mind thinks of a universal mind, it tends to project that same kind of agency that it claims for itself onto a universal mind. So, in other words, when we think about God, generally speaking, we tend to give God not only a face. I mean, we tend to not only look at God or view God as a person, but we also tend to look at God as an authority that has agency, you know, and that makes decisions. And I think that is where individual mind goes wrong, because I think that a universal mind has no directed or goal-oriented or linear agencies as individual minds tend to have, you know. But I think universal mind is creation, and creation merely arises or subsides, and it does that eternally, you know. So I think there's just when you ask this question, you know, why would such an intelligence or why would such an energy allow for, you know, for individual mind to go wrong in that it develops ego? It's just the question is sort of it's the wrong question in my personal point of view, but that's just me. So anyway, Krishnamurti and Bohm tried to sort of circumvent this problem of agency by pointing out, or by pointing to some all-encompassing order of things. And in order to review what they say there, let's jump to a quick excerpt regarding that point. Now, if that energy is intelligent, why has it allowed man to move away in the wrong direction? I think that may be part of a process, something that is inevitable in the nature of thought. You see, if thought is going to develop, that possibility must exist to bring about thought in man. Is that the original freedom of man, to choose? No, that is, thought has to have the capacity to make this mistake. But if that intelligence was operating, why did it allow this mistake? See, here's this, I think here the projection again happens of projecting agency onto this universal consciousness. Well, we can suggest that there is a universal order or a law. All right, the universe functions in order. Yes, and it is part of the order of the universe that this particular mechanism can go wrong. If a machine breaks down, it is not disorder in the universe, it is part of universal order. In the universal order, there is disorder where man is concerned. It is not disorder at the level of the universe. No, at a much lower level. At the level of man, it is disorder. And why has man lived from the beginning in this disorder? because he is still ignorant, he still hasn't seen the point. But he is part of the whole, yet in one tiny corner man exists and has lived in disorder, and this enormous conscious intelligence hasn't. You could say that the possibility of creation is also the possibility of disorder. That if man had the possibility of being creative, there would also be the possibility of mistake. It could not be fixed like a machine, always to operate in perfect order. The intelligence would not have turned him into a machine that would be incapable of disorder. You know, that's an interesting thought. And I think it's worthwhile thinking about this. And that is that creation always allows for all types of outcomes, you know, and there seems to be a lack of judgment, or a lack of moral judgment, you know. And I think it's really hard for us to accept that, because dwelling mostly in this individual sort of mind, we tend to function from the point of view of agency, and so we would hope that there is some mechanism, you know, that would be able to discern between something is moral or something is amoral, you know, whether we would have to rely on some sort of authority that speaks law into action, or whether we would rely on some mechanism such as karma, you know, the law of karma, you know, to kick in, you know, maybe even in an afterlife or in a new life. It really doesn't matter. But I think that's that's a really important aspect to ponder, is that there's the possibility that, you know, creation encompasses or entails all kinds of possibilities, scenarios and outcomes, and that's sort of like the point of creation, is to allow for mistake, you know. Yeah. So next we return to the question whether there is something beyond universal mind or cosmic order, and we could start with a couple of hypotheses again to clarify that. Universal mind has created nature, which has an order and a deeper meaning. And secondly, without division, and I think here they mean the division into individual minds, without division there is order. And now follows a very crucial paragraph, crucial because a distinction between perception and being is made. And let's review another excerpt to drive this point home. To put it very simply, division has come to an end. The division created by time, created by thought, created by this education and so on, all that, because it has ended. The other is obvious. You mean that without the division, then the other is there to be perceived? Not to be perceived, but it's there. But then how does one come to be aware that it's there? I don't think one becomes aware of it. Then what leads you to say it? Would you say it is? Not I perceive it or it is perceived. Yes, it is. It is. So, you know, I mean, this is something you should think about. It's the difference between being, in terms of being, of just being, without being perceived that it is. And there's no easy way to there's no easy way to put this, really. But I mean, a basic notion of even quantum physics is that, you know, things are things. I mean, things in terms of material things are, you know, upon being perceived by a perceiver, okay, or by some observing, you know, apparatus, let's say. Whereas here we say that universal mind is sort of like independently of any type of observer. It just is, you know. And that, again, is really hard for us to accept, because we just tend to, because we're so used to, you know, computing the world via our perception, you know, and we're so used to conceiving of any type of reality via our perception, or our ability to perceive, you know. So all these concepts that tend to open us up, they're just hard to wrap your head around, you know. So let's go on to another quick excerpt that I find helpful. We're saying that the universe is alive, as it were. It is mind, and we are part of it. We can only say that we're a part of it when there is no I. No division. No division. I would like to push it a little further. Is there something beyond all this? Beyond the energy, you mean? Yes. We said that nothingness is everything, and so it is that which is total energy. It is undiluted, pure, uncorrupted energy. Is there something beyond that? Now we can sort of summarize the ensuing discourse in hypotheses again, which I think will be helpful, and that is: pure energy is emptiness. First one. Second one, there is something beyond that. Thirdly, if it is beyond emptiness, it must be something other than emptiness. The fourth one, if it is something other than emptiness, it must have a substantial quality. Fifth one, the ego becomes an illusion of that substance, or of that substantial quality. And sixth one, that substance is the absolute. And seventh, in that it is the absolute, it is completely independent, self-moving, self-active, and without cause. So David Bohm then harks back to the impossibility to think or talk about the absolute when he says, you're saying that the absolute must be put into words, but we feel it can't be. Any attempt to put it into words makes it relative. Emptiness and silence and energy are immense, really immeasurable. But there is something greater than that. We will say that whatever you speak of, there is certainly something beyond it. Silence, energy, whatever, then there is always room logically for something beyond that. But the point is this, that even if you say there is something beyond that, still you logically leave room for going again beyond that. No. Well, why is that? You see, whatever you say, there's always room for something beyond. There's nothing beyond. Well, that point is not clear. There is nothing beyond that. I stick to that. Not dramatically, not dogmatically, not obstinately. I feel that is the beginning and the ending of everything. And by that he means, that energy, that there's no name for it. The ending and the beginning are the same, right? In which sense? In the sense that you are using the beginning of everything as the ending? Yes, right? Would you say that? Yes, if we take the ground from which it comes, it must be the ground to which it falls. It comes from the ground, it goes to the ground, but it does not begin or end. Now, since there's this new term that comes up, the ground, or the ground of being, I would like to interject real quick that this is linked to topics which are currently being discussed in science and also in science of consciousness. And what Krishnamurti and Bohm are alluding to here is what today we would call the ground of all being, or in quantum physics, the unified field. And I would just like to point out to you that there is a series of interesting panel discussions and presentations on that, and I will link those in the description box below as well. I mean, actual, maybe 2 or 3 years back, very timely sort of panel discussions that you might be interested in. And at the time, that Krishnamurti and Bohm were having this discussion, those topics, we didn't really have the vocabulary that we have today to describe these phenomena. We didn't have the term the ground of all being, or I shouldn't say we didn't have, but they weren't as popular or as widely used as they are today. And so in that sense, this dialogue between Krishnamurti and Bohm really is sort of like an early attempt to converge, science with philosophy and with spirituality, or one of the attempts. I mean, many of them have been made in the past. And it's becoming more socially acceptable at this point. And even though scientists or philosophers alike still sort of face certain stigma today, because as I mentioned it, in my video last time, we still live in the paradigm of materialism, both in science and in philosophy, really. I mean, it just seems to be the prevailing paradigm still today. So, but I think things are starting to shift more and more. So I think you could regard this dialogue as like a start of this early type of movement that we're in the midst of right now, really. But let's move on. So there's the suggestion that there is something that we could call the ground of all being. And from the ground of all being, the universal arises, and from the universal, the particular arises. So let's pick it up from there and review another short excerpt of the conversation. First, the particular dies into the emptiness of, and then comes the universal. And that dies too. Into the ground, right? Yes. So you could say that the ground is neither born nor dies. That's right. Well, I think it almost becomes inexpressible if you say the universal is gone, because expression is the universal. You see, I'm just explaining. Everything is dying except that. Does this convey anything? Yes. Well, it is out of that everything arises and into which it dies. So that has no beginning and no ending. The second chapter is concluded by trying to relate the hitherto discussed to regular people and to estimate, of the relevance of what we've discussed for regular people. And we can summarize this part of the conversation with 4 hypotheses, and these are: man must have some contact with the ultimate ground in his life, otherwise there is no meaning. The barrier for man to have contact with the ultimate ground is the I. In order for man to have contact with the ultimate ground, he must give up on the notion of I. Where there is no I, there is no conflict, and something else is operating. And we conclude our discussion of this second chapter with these words. And I would just like to make a personal suggestion, and that sort of encapsulates what I've been saying all along in all these other videos that I made in the past, is that, I think one of our difficulties we have is that we attach agency with the notion of me-ness or I-ness, and that's probably part of the reason why it's so hard to get rid of I, the notion of I, is that you feel you give up your agency, and that's a scary thought, I mean, I get it, it's scary, and it's really hard to fathom that you could sort of let go and just sort of sink into that type of consciousness which isn't personal anymore, and still sort of be here and be able to move and act in this world, But I think it's what we have to do now as a species at this point. I think that's the next evolutionary step that we must take, because my personal opinion, every sort of civilization probably goes through this. And by civilization, I mean such as humanity, is that, and I bet we've been at this point a couple of times in the past. I mean, in the far past, there is evidence that suggests that cultures that have died out were highly technological and, were, I mean, maybe even more advanced than we are right now. And there always comes this point where if you cannot transcend the ego or the I, you tend to self-destruct. You tend to use whatever you developed in terms of technology against yourself, and then you just self-destruct and sort of extinguish yourself as a species. And I think that's sort of like the safety switch of nature, really, is that before a civilization such as humanity can really start to venture out, go off planet, as a species, it must develop its consciousness, so far as to being able to let go of this notion of I or ego, or else it won't be able to make that step. That's my personal opinion. So anyway, I hope this was of some interest to you, and I will see you in the next chapter. Bye-bye.